privilege of being CEO of Max Wildlife Trust. I've been on the island now for likely 3 years in January, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the research we do and why we do it. First of all, to give you a bit of context, we are very much focused on the Isle of Man, but we also know that we're in two bigger spheres. So on the right, we're part of the Federation of Wildlife Trusts, so we work with 46 of the wildlife trusts across the British Isles. And the interesting thing for that is, and I'm going to walk around a bit, is that we're slap bang in the middle of the Irish Sea, in the middle of the British Isles. So for biodiversity, for data collection, for research, we're really important. One example of that would be the Cardiff Man, for example. So we're in a really important place.
What's that sentence?
The Cardiff Man is the Cardiff Man Bird Observatory. And then on a global scale, we're part of a federation or a group of small islands. So we're now members as our DEFRA of the UK Overseas Territories Conservation Forum. So that links all the kind of dependencies and all the UCOTs together to have conversations about conservation. Which for me personally is great, because before I came here I was on an even smaller island in the South Atlantic called St Helena, which is a UCOT, and also did some work on Ascension. So it's now lovely in this role that we can join that up. And when we go into the Wildlife Trust, we're one of the smaller wildlife trusts, but in those conversations with other territories, we're one of the biggest organisations, the most well-funded, the island with the biggest GDP, we've got a biodiversity strategy with the government. So two very different fields in which we operate, but absolutely everything we do is about the Isle of Man. And why do we do research? Well, research is a broad term, and it can, I'm not suggesting we do multi-replicated trials and write high journal papers in science. We'd love to, maybe we will one day, but we do research really to try and give us information about what we need to do and how successful we are at doing it. And ultimately, one of our ambitions in our strategy and the strategy of the whole of the Wildlife Trust movement is around a nature recovery network. How can we make more land and more sea managed well for nature, and how does that then benefit biodiversity? And there are other targets around nature-based solutions for people, but I'm going to focus more today on the nature recovery network. And we want to know what we need to do, and we also want to know if what we're doing is successful. So keep that in mind as I give you a flavour of what we're doing. The first thing I'll touch on is our nature reserves. So we've now got 27 nature reserves across the Isle of Man. But overall, to give you a context on this, they only cover about 0.3% of the island. And that's a quandary for the whole of the Wildlife Trust Federation for years, for 60, 70 years now max. We've been doing what we do well, and we get a piece of precious land, we put a fence around it, and we protect it. But it's not really getting across the whole island. So nature reserves are still, though, the core of what we do. In terms of our nature reserves, one of our longest term data sets is the floral surveys that our reserves manager Tricia does every year on our meadows, mainly up and around Curragh, Clonsarfield, Goshen, Crunion, Cromes, but we do long-term floristic data sets. That's really important to show that how we're managing our land is benefiting nature. We're also now, through really the enthusiasm of one of our new colleagues, David Bellamy, who's our Agri-Environment Officer, starting to collect bird data on our nature reserves. We've also got an invertebrate group that's also going into some of our nature reserves and collecting invertebrate data. So through our nature reserves, long-term holdings, long-term data sets. We're also involved in something quite exciting for us around the Upland Peak Survey, and that's one of the posters outside on the wall produced by Sarah Hickey, one of my colleagues. And Sarah, probably now for about the last 3.5 years, has been carrying out some field research up in the uplands. And she started off doing the photos there where basically it's a probe for depth, and then there was another bit of data that was collecting whether there was sphagnum there. Sphagnum is an indicator of whether peat is still forming. So Sarah was doing that, and she's ploughed away about almost 5,000 hectares now across the uplands. Sarah's now evolved this model, and what Sarah is now doing with the program, we've now gone a bit more digital, so she has a tablet and an app. And the picture in the top right there shows some of the work, the field data that Sarah's collecting. And she's collecting information about hags where peat's been harvested up on turberies, so she's actually collecting areas for peat restoration. But she's also now collecting more information about more of the floristic species that are there, so it builds up more of a habitat type. So it's not just sphagnum, more about the plant species and more about the restoration work that needs to happen. The agri-environment scheme is really exciting for us, and we hope it's something that's really exciting for the island. So where our nature reserves cover 0.3%, agriculture covers at least 72%, and some stats would say agriculture covers 88% of the island land. So imagine the opportunity for us if we can somehow get small gains across such a huge area of the island. And through David, that's David Bellamy, our agri-environment officer. David's, I could talk all about David, but let's just say he's joined us at the perfect time. So, he's a guy that studied ecology at Edinburgh, he's come back to the island after a career doing something else. He's got a very big brain, huge knowledge about the island and a huge passion for conservation. But his biggest skill is that he's excellent at building relationships with farmers. And there's quite a quandary about, conservationists and farmers, not in the island, but generally the world over, about, almost being in battle. But I come back to again for us, it's 80% of the island. So we've got to be pragmatic and find ways that we can work on big scale. And is it working? So just one example there of a news item from the BBC News page that David, on one of his visits, actually has rediscovered. Is that research or is it a random find? Well, he's recording it, it's a published thing, it's information that helps justify that. We found lapwings have nested for the first time in the Isle of Man for many, many years this year. Sadly, their chicks didn't fledge, they were predated. However, that was the first successful nesting that has occurred for many years. But what we're now looking to do is, ultimately we've started making an scheme with the island. Manx Wildlife Trust is the delivery partner and it's now just into its second year. Fantastic opportunity, great for us, we've got keys to the door for 80% of the island, we can go and help them do it better. But we need to know if it works. And currently it's judged on how many initiatives are taken up on the basis that they've worked elsewhere. But we as a wildlife trust, we want to prove that better. We want to get biological data. We want to know if there's more birds, if the floras are better, are the invert life better, long-term data sets going on. So we need to start now. And we've started little bits, but one of the things that we're doing is that we're going to train the farmers. Not all of them, 350 farmers are not all suddenly going to want to become biodiversity recorders, but you'd be surprised how many do. There's quite a lot of interest in birds, so we're organising bird courses to train them to do some citizen science recording. Are there going to be farms where we can start doing floral plots to measure that? Yes, we're going to do that. And I'll come on later to other ways that we're going to get some of our volunteers involved in some of the research. Because we want to be able to produce papers in 10 years' time about the agri-environment scheme in the Isle of Man and what a positive difference it's made to the island. So we need to start collecting data on it. But great opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit about all of these. I nearly put this at the end of the talk, and then I thought, no, I won't see the leave this at the end, let's chuck it in now. So we could have a long conversation about all of this. What I would say after nearly 3 years on the island is that there are extreme polar views on them. At one end of the spectrum, there are people saying, get rid of them, it should be, we need to take the New Zealand approach and cull them. And at the other end of the spectrum, people are saying they should be given a Manx passport, they're really attractive, they've been here for 60 years, let's use them to attract visitors and tourists. And there's everything in between. But for me, and for Manx Wildlife Trust, we've decided that we just need to be a bit more informed. We need to get a little bit more information. I couldn't tell you if you said how many are there. Some people said it's 50, some people said it's 2,000. We don't know. So we're going to try and find that out as a Wildlife Trust. So we've commissioned an organisation called BH Wildlife Consultancy, and they specialise in counting large animals with a drone with a thermal imaging camera. And they do it typically on deer for estates in Scotland, but they've also done it bizarrely for wallabies. In Loch Lomond, there's an island in Loch Lomond, there's also an island in Wogan Abbey where there's wallabies, and so they know it works. And interestingly, there's a little funny anecdote, when you see a thermal image of a wallaby, to quote the guy that runs BH Wildlife Consultancy, it looks like a mini T-Rex. So we're going to try and get that. The picture at the top right is our reserves manager Tricia handing over a bag of wallaby poo that she's been collecting over a year period and freezing in her freezer for different seasons. And we've now passed that across to Rachel, who runs taxonomics, and Rachel's doing the DNA analysis on it because we want to know what plants they're eating. So for me, in my role, I'm not a wallaby ecologist, but I know the spectrum of conversations around wallabies that I'm involved in, and I think for Manx Wildlife Trust, it's an important topic for us. We want to know if they're doing damage, and if we need to do something. We've got no strong view, apart from we want to know more and have a better measured view of the island going forward. So we're going to find out what they've been eating, and we're going to find out how many there are in hotspots. The third bit of data that we're hoping happens and this won't be through us, but we believe others are doing it, is when there's roadkills or when people find dead wallabies now, there's taking a clip out of their ears and do the DNA on them, because there's an argument that, you know, these were 2 or 3 wallabies that escaped from a wildlife park 50, 60 years ago, and basically they've had incest and inbred for 60 years, and you find wallabies with glaucomas. Are they inbred? Is it well for the wallabies? And again, at the end of all this, maybe one end of the spectrum, it's we need to get rid of them, or the other end of the spectrum is we need to bring some new gene pool in and improve the population. So we're going to find out. But it's an interesting project. One of the outstanding long-term data sets that Max Wildlife Trust are involved with is on the Carford Man. The Bird Observatory in the Carford Man has been recording birds since 1959. It's a very important place. Think back to the start where I said about the middle of the Irish Sea. So in terms of British Isles bird movements and migrations across the British Isles, the Carford Man is a really important place. And our guys are out there. And one great example of at the coalface where that's benefited, Max shearwaters were not on the Carford Man 30 years ago, I'm told. They'd all been wiped out by longtails predating on them. There was a long-tail eradication programme put in place. We're now back up to, we believe, over 1,000 pairs of Max shearwaters nesting on the island. And that is through field data collected, both observational and audio, and burrows, that we've now got that data. And for the first time last year, we did actually have 2 pairs of puffins tried a nesting event on the Carford Man, which was the first time there's been any physical records of a puffin on the calf for over 20 years. They didn't come back this year, sadly, but we think that's not necessarily bad. They may still come back. But exciting place. So really good long-term data set, and the shearwaters is one example of where we're monitoring for a really key conservation project. We do try bits of new stuff on the calf. So a small step forward, but the Curragh Wildlife Park actually funded as a thermal imaging camera. Now, if you don't use that for birds, that's actually an image of an eider duck. So even monitoring the number of eider duck nests on the calf, which is now in the hundreds, and it's the important place in the island for eider ducks and one important place in the Irish Sea. So we're finding eider ducks that like to nest in the bracken and lie away, and we get them better with the thermal imaging camera. That's the same technology that we're going to use to try and count wallabies. What else is new? Well, we've got funding again from the Wildlife Park through the Conservation Fund to install a Motus receiver. Motus, this isn't at my age, this is off the Motus website, but Motus is a wildlife tracking system. And in short, you put up an aerial, you put little taggers on birds or bats or anything else you want to monitor the movements of, and then if they're within range of the aerial, you get a ping. So if by putting up a receiver, you'll see on that map, that's the current one, there's nothing in the Irish Sea. So we're going to trailblaze and put the first Motus receiver in the Irish Sea. And in that Irish Sea network group that I'm now part of with the Wildlife Trust, we're having conversations with the other ones, all the other 5 nations, about could they put Motus receivers up. So if we put one up now, we can start tracking, for example, any birds that fly over us that's been tagged somewhere else will get a ping. So we can be collecting data that adds to the global data. But we can also start tagging our own birds, and we're thinking wheatears and blackcaps for local movements. But imagine then if we get a ring around the Irish Sea, and then we could start targeting certain key seabirds that move around the Irish Sea, and then we could start looking at around industrialisation, climate change, etc. And the technology is well proven and actually not that expensive, it's fundable. So we're getting the first receivers funded, it's going up. We're going to try that, and then hopefully we'll inspire other people to fund more receivers around the Irish Sea. Also on the calf, we do an annual seal survey. We have 12 seal pupping sites, and we've got volunteers on there now. I just had a Zoom call with them this morning, in our team meeting. And they're out there now monitoring the seal pups. We've got 12 so far this year, which is wonderful. So they count the pups, they count the adults, they're doing photographs of the adults to try and do photo ID to find how far the range is. And again, it's another long-term data set. And when you look at that, if Lara was here now, Dr. Lara, our marine officer, Lara would say, don't worry about the blip. You know, that was probably an exceptional year. And actually what we should be looking at now, what we're expecting or hypothesising, is that this will become almost a plateau now, because the calf has potentially reached its breeding potential population everywhere. But we'll see. And this is another great advantage of why long-term data sets are important. Either flowers in our, flora in our nature reserve, seals, birds on the Cardiff Man. Those real long-term data sets are crucial to measure our success and our success in terms of what we're doing within our biodiversity and nature recovery network. So it's a really important data. We have an ambition to create a carp research strategy. We drafted one for Manx National Heritage. It's their island, so we're working very closely with Manx National Heritage. And the ambition is that we look at more specific bird species, particularly about how we might monitor them, link to wider data sets and start to get some of the calf records published within wider bird observatory, Irish Sea, British Isles data. So that's in its second round. I'm a diver. So Sea Search was something, it's an underwater citizen science program. It's run by the Marine Conservation Society, and for just over 2 years now, Manx Wildlife Trust have taken on has been the delivery agent for that. So Dr. Lara Howe, again, Lara leads on this, so she's our Isle of Man Sea Search coordinator, and we're developing a team. We're probably getting about 50 or 60 forms filled in, and without going into too much detail, you go underwater and you record what's there, and you can do it to different levels. Species simple recording, or you can go into more detailed habitat types, biotypes. Why is that useful? Well, importantly, increases ocean literacy. So there's a lot of scuba divers now have done our courses on the island already, and they're looking at nature and understanding nature better, and there's a really important value for that. But the data that we get from that can be used, certainly across when I was involved, it was very much fundamental underpinning data for marine protected areas. And in the Isle of Man, we've now got a map of where we haven't been, where there's been no record, so we can start to plug those gaps in. And we're also mobilising our Sea Search team on other things. But one interesting dive this year, this is actually a picture I took upside down on the pontoon in the sea terminal. And this was simulated by our MHK, Dr. Michelle Haywood, who said, can we organise a Sea Search dive under the pontoon to see if there's any non-native invasives populating under there. Specifically, there's an orange sea squirrel that we were looking for. Thankfully, we didn't find it, but it was an interesting dive, and it's an example there of doing some field work to try and find an answer in non-natives. You mentioned seagrass. Seagrass is on a lot of people's lips. So the Isle of Man has significant seagrass, and there's a whole blue carbon project now, which is not just seagrass, the blue carbon under the deep sea, etc., that's there. And the bit that Manx Wildlife Trust are involved with is helping get the data for the seagrass. And we're doing two things. One is we're going to help with the seagrass mapping. So that is a screen grab of imagine a GPS device that's on a floating buoy that when you're underwater you're towing it round. So that is the accurate track of the seagrass that's in Fort Island, so at the north tip of the Langness Peninsula. So we're doing that, and actually across in Derby Haven Bay, we've found, we think now, about 7 new seagrass beds this year. We've only got about 10% of the way across the bay. We keep finding another one last summer. So it's a fun project. I make no apologies for that. I do it in spare time. But it's also, we hope, really interesting. And our vision is that we end up with a layer on the government map. There's a government environment map, which is fantastic. And there's different layers on that map. And we want to be, hopefully help to be a catalyst to get a seagrass layer on that map. And that seagrass layer, the more accurate it is, the better. And then also in terms of abundance. So we're no one's ever done it, bizarrely, that I'm aware of, but a seagrass abundance shoots per metre, you drop a quadrat down and you get some abundance score as well. So we started the mapping. We're also involved in some seagrass restoration trials. So we actually did a trial this year. I haven't put the initial map in, but that sea grab map underneath, that marine chart, the little store with the red pinning, that's where we've planted a small seagrass bed. Now, we put it there because it used to be there years ago, so we've tried to put it back in again. There's a whole thing we need to conserve before we restore, but by doing the test, hopefully when the data's done on the mapping, there might be an ambition there where we can put more seagrass around the island that's evidence-based. We're also involved in a shark tagging programme. Peter Duncan will thank me for putting a picture in. That's our conservation officer now in the government. and we're tagging small sharks. We're tagging them, we've got local fishermen trained up, and although we've only had one recatch now, there's been quite a step up this year in terms of how many fishermen are tagging sharks for us. And ultimately, they're an important species, you know, the group, toad, spur dog, some of the big rays. We need to find that data out, and we can add that then to our conversations about Irish sea broadly. So we do that. And then it's about how can we get other people to help us. So we've got our conservation officers, David, Lara, Sarah, and Andre, and Patricia, and others who are collecting field data, but we can't do it all. And so we want to get more to help us. That's just a screen grab of our new online recording platform that goes, importantly, it links straight through into the main NBN atlas where the Island data goes. So we're looking to add all the time to that data. Biodim, I don't know if anyone's ever done a biodim. Hands up on biodim. Yes, I'm not surprised you've done one. Imagine, I got you all, imagine you're in for biodim now and say, right, we're going out there, that's the area, we're going to find everything that lives there. Birds, inverts, plants, fish, anything, and you record it. Now, the biggest value of that is about engagement and understanding. So we brought a culture back and tried before, we haven't invented it, but we did our first biodim, certainly in my time. This year, it was really successful. Another citizen science group we've got that's fantastic is our invertebrate group. And that's Dawn Colley, our education officer, who also runs our invert group. That's them, and they're just a group of passionate people that want to find, you know, we've got fly experts and spider experts, etc. And just to show you some of the things, I could have put 5 or 6 slides up now, but that's just a snapshot from this year alone of new island land species that the invert group have found on the island. And I could have put 30 species up. I asked for information for this and given one. That's just this year, new species that they've found. Now, if you project that, currently, I'll give you one example, watching the time. We get involved in ecological surveys for planning. And I'm not an ecologist. So I ask the question, I say, well, we go along and do a survey, and if you wanted to build something, you go to DEF and they say, you need to get an ecological habitat survey done. And then on the back of that, you may have to then pay for a bird survey, or a bat survey, or a frog survey, or a lizard survey. No one would ever say do an invert survey, very unlikely, I'm mentioning it, but unlikely, or no one would say do a soil fauna, you know, soil microbes. And my theory is that there could be really important local endemic soil microbes, inverts, and the world just doesn't know about them. And I would think in 20 or 30 years' time, when field techniques are better, we'll know about those species, and we'll be making planning and development decisions on some of the really important things that live in the soil, but currently they're not big enough to survey easily. So this invert group work is priceless, and we're hoping that we can actually really start to develop this on more of our own nature reserves initially to get better data. And we're also keen to train the next generation. So last year we launched a Wildlife Observer Certificate. Really successful, he says, well, it's on the basis of the feedback from the students and the fact that the course was full and they all kept turning up. And they learned lots, and we taught them, that's them doing floral quadrats up at the Ayers National Nature Reserve, we had them pond dipping, we had them on doing rock pulling sessions, just to give them a baseline information set. Now what's fantastic is that both with that and our wildlife gardening course, the wildlife trusts across don't offer, you can't do a wildlife course in the wildlife trust. But they've said to us now, can you come and help us set this up for the whole of the Federation? So we're hoping that there'll be observer courses that start here in the Isle of Man. But yeah, next generation coming through. This is an example, this is Gail, who's lepidoptera and butterfly expert, and this is Gail recently training up people to do butterfly transects. Now, these are again a group of people that are interested in butterflies, you know, birds are at the top of most people's list, plants in terms of people looking at them, but butterflies are the next one because they're quite big, they're colourful, and people like to photograph them. But they're also a great potential indicator species for, in our mind, agri-environment. So we want to inspire people to look at nature, but we want those long-term data sets. So we're now looking at where we can set up butterfly monitoring across areas where agri-environment changes could be having an impact. And then in 10 years, 20 years' time, if we've got those long-term data sets, then as an island we can really have a measured view on the success of our agri-environment scheme. That's our ambition. Ultimately, we want the data accessible. Lots of people collect data. I used to work in botanical gardens for 10 years with lots of botanists, and I couldn't find two of them that have the same way of recording data. So it's a bit of herded cats, but ultimately, people do want their data to be used, because otherwise it just ends up as a private set of data that doesn't really help anyone. So delightfully, I can say this, Manx Wildlife Trust have just taken on the contract for the biodiversity recording partnership, which means we're going to be recruiting a person soon 1 day a week to come and help us with our data. And the biggest part of that is going to be trying to get everyone to be shoveled a little bit so that the data flow gets to the right place. Part of that is the Isle of Man NBN Atlas, and before that there's another database called Recorder 6 that I won't go into the details of. But my message to you is that we want data collected, it needs to be tidy, and it needs to get to a place where people can actually access it and then use it. And so we can do that better with it. We also want to publish. These are just two examples of publish. So until last year, I don't think there'd ever been a published like Manx Wildlife Trust annual report. So last year we did our first one, and it's online. You get the PDF on our website, and all the officers put, there's tables and graphs and information that's been collected that's in there. Graham's, my colleague, is currently working on this year's annual report, which is going to take us up a level as well. And why is that important? Well, we need to show to our trustees, the animal population, the government, the people that we're working with, that we're actually delivering, but also, even more important than that the data is being recorded, that we can judge our successes on our next priorities. So, really important. And the paper on the right has just come out in the journal called The Peregrine, which is a fantastic journal for the Isle of Man, and that's a paper written by David Bellinger, agri-environmentalist, about the demise of the yellow lamb. But the positive message is in there about how, through agri-environment, we may get the yellow lamb back, and we may get other bird species back, and we may actually keep other birds that are here now, stop them going. So, important that we publish, and in the right journals, in the right environment, to the right audiences. Nearly done, last slide. So our last slide is about the future. So this is a working image. So I couldn't, if you said to me now, I'm not going to challenge you, but if you said to me, why are you doing that? Why Manx Wildlife Trust working on seals? Why are you doing invert research? What we hope to have is a state of nature document. In other words, what is our nature like right now? And my predecessor had started to write this, and it never got published, and I believe it never got published because we couldn't finish it. We couldn't get all the data we wanted. Well, I guess my pitch now to the team is we're not going to beat ourselves up if it's not perfect. We're going to get the best data we've got and we're going to publish it. And if there's some gaps, then that will drive what we do next. So there's a fantastic document produced by BirdLife and the birds. We've done a similar one about the plants, and conversations with Whale and Dolphin Watch, Bat Group, our own invert group, etc. I'm very confident that we can pull a document together that we can put out next year in what is our 50th year as Manx Wildlife Trust, to actually say this is what we believe the state of nature on the Isle of Man is now, and therefore these are what we think we're going to do next. So that document's coming, and importantly, we're not planning to put our badge on the top. We want it to be done as a biosphere document because we want all the other organisations to feel that they can work with us and that we're doing it as a collective. And I think, again, that's really important for the island, that this is an island's state of nature document. So that's coming out next year. So I hope that gives you a flavour of some of the research we're doing, why we're doing it, where we're doing it, how we hope to get other people helping us do it, and then how we're going to communicate